I bought a Switch 2 for Mario Kart World, more specifically so I can make content about it, but it left me so conflicted. It left me with so much that I wanted to say that I said nothing. No videos for half a year, oops. There's still a lot I'd like to say, but until I eventually upload my senior's thesis for this damn game, here's a quick and dirty ranking of all the tracks now that the game is 8 months old and nobody gives a damn anymore. Starting off with what is easily the worst track in the game, Shell Cup's Peach Stadium. Going off track title, there are technically only 30 courses in Mario Kart World. You still have 8 cups of 4 tracks each, but you have 2 versions of Crown City and then 2 versions of Peach Circuit. Regardless, people often won't even rank this as its own track. As for me, if it's a part of the track listing on the menu and picking a cup, and it has a layout distinct from the other despite sharing the same name, I say it counts as its own track. Not to mention, if you're playing to the cups in order, this will be the player's first impression of anything Peach Circuit. And my god, what a terrible first impression. What's wrong with it? You go through what is already one of the weaker intermissions in the game, only to finally get to the track. And it's a single loop on an oval. And for all intents and purposes, you're still on a wide road of cars, so it's as if you never even left the intermission portion. Before World, I always considered DS's version of Baby Park to be the absolute worst track. It was for a handheld that's over 2 decades old at this point, so I didn't think there would be something that could even compare ever again. Yet here we are. Starview Peak. More like Starview Mid, am I right? Hahaha, okay. I don't know what this is more undeserving of. Its name or its atmosphere, because this is a gorgeous track that is unfortunately tied to a very underwhelming layout. The roads are comedically wide, more than half the track is water, and I might as well get this out of the way now because the implementation of water is why I ranked a lot of the stuff where I did. Simply put, I don't like the water gameplay. Mario Kart World, especially in comparison to its predecessors, has an engine that already feels slower and looser, 2 issues that are only partially remedied by the game's new tech. However, the water racing exemplifies both these issues. As it was, I already didn't care much for the underwater stuff in 7 or 8. So on the surface, pun not intended, driving on top of the water seemed like a smart change. Anyone here ever play Hydro Thunder? Shit slaps. The way you gracefully slide across the water in that game, really carrying your speed and momentum into those turns, is what makes the game feel so good to play. Hydro Thunder focuses on the buoyancy water can provide. Mario Kart World focuses more on the water slows you down because it's water part. You really feel it weighing you down here. It does feel like you're driving through water, so I'll give them that, but in a way where you're more so slogging through it. It's not fun. Outside the beautiful visuals are deserving of a much more compelling track, the only thing people like about Starview is that you can avoid some of the water segments by narrowly driving on the side. There you go. There's the highlight of the track. Koopa Beach. Supposedly based off Super Nintendo's Koopa Beach 2, this iteration is sort of like World's Baby Park. It's a 5-lap gauntlet of a basic circle layout. The immediate problem is that personally, not a huge fan of World's item meta, and cornering doesn't feel as snappy as, say, Double Dash. So I don't think the game's engine really benefits from a tiny track like this, but I'll give them credit for having a track that isn't just another 3-lapper, and there's surprisingly no water racing despite being on a beach, so it's got that going for it. Peach Beach. Beach map's really getting shafted here. On paper, this should be better than the original Peach Beach because they expanded it with a cute little market square segment. In fact, all 3 laps have unique routing in this version of the track. The assumption is that it's just Peach Beach with more, right? Making it the superior version, hypothetically. With this in mind, I think it'd just be best to dissect this lap by lap. Lap 1 is the original layout, except somehow simplified further. Funny to even say, given the original layout was incredibly basic. The one thing I'd argue made the original even remotely interesting to begin with was the rising tide. Once upon a time, driving in water used to be really bad, like worse than driving through grass pad. However, a lot of tracks, Peach Beach included, worked this into the track's design. The beach used to indent way further to the right, so if the water wasn't there, the obvious best racing line would be, well, mindlessly driving straight. The quirk of Peach Beach was that you obviously couldn't just drive straight. You were trying to ride along the rising tide, getting as close to the water as possible so you could take the cleanest possible racing line without actually submerging into that water. That's what the track was all about. Of course, the inclusion of the Satan Duckies made this a much more dynamic challenge than you would expect. Then on the left, there was this route that would be completely sunken into the water unless you timed it just right. It was also an option if you had a mushroom, of course. Breaking it down like this makes Peach Beach seem like the most complex design ever. It's not. It's pretty rudimentary, all things considered. Nonetheless, that's what made the track more than what would otherwise be just a basic oval loop. In Mario Kart World, first, that whole part to the left is just gone. Well, sort of. There is a jump over there still, but since this first U-turn cuts sharper, placing you closer to the right instead of giving you an equal decision, taking that left route is just out of the question now. It's too out of the way. Then, of course, there's the fact that water doesn't slow you down nearly nearly as much as it used to. In fact, you're most likely just going to be driving straight through here now. The thing I had just said would have made the original mindless. And even if water did slow you down as much as it used to, the tide itself doesn't change anymore. Or if it does, it's so gradual now that it's hardly a factor. At the very least, it's nothing like the original where the tide rose and lowered so quickly that you're going to immediately catch that detail as early as lap 1. Then there's lap 2, which I'd argue is the best lap here in all fairness. It's the little market square portion mentioned prior, and it's cute. Although, being objective, it is just kind of a lot of driving straight and pulling tricks. There's a multitude of routes above, but if the world record time trials suggest anything, it's fastest just to ignore all of it. Then there's lap 3, and lap 3 just sucks. So it starts with a literal 10 seconds of flying straight. Again, going off the world record, it's not actually worth your time to be messing with the roofs or walls on the side. Then from there, all you got is 2 more lines of driving straight, except it's on water, so it's slow and boring. You get out of the water, drive straight some more, and there you go. That's the new and improved Peach Beach. The table dressing they added is cute, but look past that table dressing and it's a much less dynamic and interesting layout. And the original wasn't much to write home about in the first place. Wario Shipyard. Oh, how they've massacred my boy. Wario Shipyard used to be one of my favorite tracks in 7. Looking back, maybe I sung its praises a little too much, but you know, it was a solid course. Much like a lot of 7 and 8's design, the water here was used more for some visual flair than it did impact how you approach the track. They had a fun jet stream of bubbles you could trick off of, otherwise you were diving in and out of the water like it wasn't even there. In World, by comparison, you can essentially just copy and paste what I said during Starview Peak, because the big problem with this iteration is that this is primarily just a water track now. And again, not a huge fan of the water gameplay here. Most of the gameplay here is ironically trying to stay out of the water as much as possible. But even when you're doing all that tight frame window summoning salts bullshit you see on social media, a good chunk of the runtime on this track is unavoidably still going to be on the water. For me, the peak of Wario Shipyard is everything post-canon. You get launched out and you can land and grind on these ship masts to completely stay out of the water. Then taking this ramp to cut a chunk of the corner here is super fun. Bonus points for having a rail you can cleanly land on. Outside that one part I outlined, the bottom line is that I don't like the water gameplay, and Wario Shipyard is really held back by making it the focal point. Desert Hills. Everyone's favorite. Desert Hills. What? I don't know if I've ever met anyone who really cared much for this course, but nothing wrong with bringing back a dud and reimagining it to turn it into something more substantial. So what did they do to shake up Desert Hills? Well, the solution was obvious. They removed the hills. Now it's just desert. Sick. Oh, remove that pyramid too. We really want to emphasize the desert aspect. I love sand, sponsored by sand. Pretty lame track with not much to it. But hey, you don't have to drive on water, so there's that. Rainbow Road. Oh boy, Rainbow Road. You guys ready for this one? I'm a man of spicy takes, but this might be the spiciest in the whole video. When Mario Kart World dropped, people went nuts for this one. It was being called the best Rainbow Road in the series. No, the single best track of all time. I had so much I wanted to say about this track. I was working on a whole 30-minute video about this one course alone. I might still do that video, but for the purposes of this video, I'll just give my TLDR. I do not like this iteration of Rainbow Road. It is everything I don't like about Mario Kart World. We're talking boring intermissions that are essentially just driving straight, literally in Rainbow Road's case. We're talking roads that are way too wide, courses that are too easy despite being the last one in the game, boring water segments, de-emphasized turns, flying straight with nothing to do. Holy fucking shit, there is so much flying fucking straight in this track. In fact, I timed it. Do you know how much of the new Rainbow Road is just flying straight? On average from my own testing, 105 seconds, aka a minute and 45 of this. I guess Nintendo felt bad that so much of the game was driving straight, so they wanted to make sure that players had ample opportunity to fly straight too. An entire 3-lap circuit of Big Blue takes less time to complete than the accumulative time you will spend flying straight without a single obstacle on Rainbow Road. And not to mention the horribly implemented tech. Shouldn't the final track of the game be a final test of everything you've learned up until that point? Yet, here we have Rainbow Road, a track with not a single grind rail to grind on, or even any walls to ride on, unless you want to be really sweaty and count the side of the track, but I doubt Nintendo made sure the tracks have a side so they could ensure people could do more summoning salts bullshit off of it. The point is that if any track is going to incorporate walls to ride on as a core part of its design, it should have been Rainbow Road. But I guess if they did, they wouldn't have had room to add the 5th flying segment where you do nothing but go, ooh, wow, whoa, that's so pretty, look at that. And I think that's the main thing I don't like about this track. It's all table dressing. It's manipulative. It plays this grand orchestrated piece that transforms as you hit different parts of the track. It's constantly gorgeous with tons of bright colors. You got callbacks to other tracks in Rainbow Roads, and being completely fair, the presentation is top-notch here. I won't argue against that. It was an adventure. It reminded people of their childhood. It made people cry. Look, I'm not gonna make fun of people for getting emotional over a video game because I've had plenty of games that made me choke up. And if a game is able to do that, even Mario Kart, I think it just goes to show how well executed its presentation really is. But that's not really what I value in a kart racer. I do believe that certain elements hold more value in different genres. Having a story that's just whatever in Mario Galaxy 2 isn't going to stop it from having a 97 on Metacritic, whereas the story and the writing is the entire reason you would play a Telltale game, for instance. As much as I love World's graphical and audio presentation, when it comes to Mario Kart, I'm more concerned about it engaging the player mechanically, which is why I find it insulting that the final track of the game is brain dead easy, has an intermission that is a literal line, is mostly driving straight, has a minute and a half of doing nothing but flying forward, has a boring water segment, roads that are way too wide, and does not make an effort to implement any of the game's new tech. Instead, what they opted out to do is make a track that holds players emotionally hostage by seducing them with shiny visuals and music that unironically makes people cry. Sound strategy, apparently, because again, this is regarded by many to be one of the absolute best tracks in the series. Not by me, though. If anything, I might be putting this too high. And if you think I'm being hyperbolic with all this, then just humor me. This is serious. Just humor me and play the track with the sound completely muted. I think you'll be shocked at how that single difference changes your perception. DK Spaceport, 2-star tracks. Before I get into why I rank this low, let me start with the two things I actually really like about this track. One, its theming. Obviously based on the arcade game, you got many of the same retro sound effects, the colorful red girders and blue oil drums, even a robotic DK you get to see scale the stage itself. And secondly, I think this track is hands down the best tutorial for the game's new tech. This game does a pretty piss poor job at naturally teaching you that you can drive on walls, although if anyone is going to figure out that's something they can do through the game opposed to through online content, it's going to be on this segment where you have these really tight corridors of ramps. I don't know why Nintendo never bothered to make a single track in the game that has a mandatory ramp lead directly into a wall to teach players about this tech, but again, if the player is going to find out about the tech through the track design alone, it will be right here since the ramp is positioned so close to the walls. While it's uncertain that players will understand or even know about the wall riding after this map, they will certainly know how the rail grinding works because DK Spaceport presents those to the player in such a genius way. You got this ramp leading up towards 2 rails, and at this point, even if the player doesn't know rail grinding is in the game, the track funnels you into using one so naturally that just instinctively, the player is going to drive into it without possibly even knowing it was a grind rail. So after naturally being funneled into using one, here we are grinding. Well, let's go in. And the camera is positioned in such a way that it makes it very obvious that, hey, this rail I'm on ends up there, but there's a rail to my right that keeps going further that surely I can switch to. And boom, just like that, you've naturally taught the player about rail grinding and rail switching without them even realizing the game was teaching them something. Because even if the player doesn't realize in time that it's the shoulder button that makes them switch rails, the important part is that you did teach them that switching rails is something that probably exists in the game. Simply planting that seed that it exists at all is all the player needs to figure out the rest. So yeah, as a tutorial, I like DK Spaceport. As a set piece, I like DK Spaceport. As a track, my problem is that since every lap here is essentially just a straight line, there's no real way to catch up to people beyond item RNG. Outside 2 bits that are, ironically, outside the actual spaceport, this isn't exactly a track you can really perfect, so to speak. If you're passing another racer, it's because either you took one of these turn sharper because you rolled a mushroom, or because they got hit by something like a shell. Since you're just majorly going straight here, if on the final lap you get hit by a blue shell or something, you just have to drive this straight line of shame with nothing else really going on, just coming to terms that you're getting second, and there's absolutely not a single thing you can do about that. So just keep driving straight, buddy. Feels bad. Again, I don't like the item meta in World, so the track itself not offering many ways to pass up opponents outside said items is a no-go for me. Boo Cinema. Weird to say, but this might have been my most anticipated course of Mario Kart World. I mean, it's probably the coolest theming of any of the new tracks. A haunted movie theater where you drive yourself into a black and white horror flick, then there's like a sepia filter the whole time while you're driving on top of a film reel. That's sick. Unfortunately, the imagination ends at the concept because the layout itself is surprisingly uninspired. No branching paths, no cool obstacles to dodge. You can grind on the outside of the film here, but it's slower, so like, don't. I really don't have much else to say. A rudimentary track without a real hook outside how it's presented. Also, come on. You can't add rail grinding into a game and then make rails you can't grind on. Can I land on this? No, I cannot. Moo Moo Meadows. So there's no tracks from Mario Kart 8 that returned as a retro in Mario Kart World. And people say that's because we've been playing 8 for so long. Okay, well then why is Moo Moo Meadows here? Not only was this at the launch of Mario Kart 8, it wasn't DLC or anything, but it's also a retro from Wii. So I'm sorry, but the excuse for there being no tracks from 8 in World because we've been playing 8 for so long does not fly when Moo Moo Meadows is right here. And for all intents and purposes, I think this version is worse than the one in 8. They straightened so much of the track out that now you just have this extended portion where you're just kind of driving straight for a bit, which definitely wasn't the case in 8. Just in general, the road feels wider and more spread out. Okay, but what about the tech? The hardcores cry. You just don't understand the tech. When you understand the tech, it becomes good. And here's my thing. When I see world records of people pulling frame-perfect cuts like this, do I think it's cool? Absolutely. The fan base is so creative. But do I think this is what Nintendo intended? Hell no. Are you kidding me? You think the same company that forced players to do intermissions online because they were upset players were picking random were expecting players to do this? I give credit to Nintendo for making such versatile tech. You can do a lot of experimenting with it. And I give credit to the fans for taking an inch and giving a mile, for really stretching out the limits of what can be done with said tech. But if a track is mid, it's mid. And if the fans found a fun and unexpected way to race on it, that credit should go to them, not Nintendo for putting in, let's be honest here, an otherwise fairly dull track. And that of course applies to Moo Moo Meadows. Choco Mountain. This is one of the most reoccurring tracks in the whole series. Choco Mountain has been in 5 games when counting Tour. Why? I don't know. Staff at Nintendo really likes this one, I guess. I never got it. This has always been a track of no shortcuts, no branching paths. The most interesting part of the track is that there were rocks that fell. Saying that out loud, that's really sad. This version has a bunch of mud pits, so I guess there are shortcuts now, given you have speed boost items. Personally, I think the mushroom cuts are a little too strong, once again putting a lot of emphasis on the items and everyone's favorite gameplay meta, bagging. They added more obstacles, but they actually make the track worse in this case. Starting with the rocks, on 64 and DS, the cliffside wasn't that steep, so you were able to see the boulders roll in from the side. Good anticipation. In the booster course pass, the boulders came in more vertically, which didn't give you as much time to react, but cleverly they made visible cracks on the ground, making it very obvious to players where exactly they would land. In World, not only is there no longer that kettle whistle, you know, that sound cue to clue players in that a rock was about to land, but the visual cue is way less obvious. Where is the rock gonna land? Well, obviously, those 3 pieces of sheet metal that aren't colored differently or dented whatsoever. Duh! This isn't like the original that has a very consistent visual style. There's like random pieces of sheet metal, chain gates, very unfitting stuff littered all over the track now. So if you're going to have an out-of-nowhere gotcha obstacle, it needs to be very clearly telegraphed. Like, again, the booster pass version. The worst obstacle are the newly added charge and chucks though. In fact, you know what? I'm gonna be bold here and say this is the worst obstacle in all of Mario Kart. And it all goes back to the idea of telegraphing things to the player. So really in any game, but especially a racing game, the idea of anticipation is very important in game design. Take something like Kirby for instance, right? You got these waddle-doo guys that appropriately waddle up to you, then freeze in place while glowing, and right there, even if this is your very first time seeing this enemy, it's immediately clear they're about to do something. So if you do get hit, it doesn't feel like the game blindsided you. Or hell, take charge and chucks from another Mario game. As you can see in Mario 3D World, they don't just immediately like go. They aim, then have a wind-up animation really telegraphing what they're about to do. All around very good game design. Mario Kart World has none of that. On this clip here, I see a charge and chuck over there, but you know, whatever. He's facing the opposite direction. He just came to a stop. So if he does start to come my way, I can react accordingly. Except no shock you because he makes a complete 180 beeline with zero momentum. There's no wind up, no anticipation. He doesn't even turn around before he runs. You just see his model rotate while he runs. This doesn't even look finished. Also, for the longest time, I saw this pathing above and thought it was part of some cool secret shortcut I wasn't aware of. But no, it's just a holdover for a connecting intermission. Great. Dandelion Depths is a track I wish I liked more. It's fine. This is a track that dares you to exercise a new tech, just to spit in your face and go, look at this bozo. To even realize that was a slow route. The tech in general, I think is mostly underutilized in a lot of World's track designs. Like I said with Moo Moo Meadows, the fans have found some really cool stuff, but much of that cool stuff is property of the fans. You look at it and it seems clear that's not how Nintendo is expecting players to approach the track. Then here we have Dandelion Depths, home to what is probably one of the most obviously signposted wall riding segments in any track. You got this easily accessible neon yellow rail setting you up for a wall ride, an elevated path you couldn't possibly miss. It's like the track is practically screaming at you to take it, but turns out it's faster to just ignore all of that. Same with this cave. What's all that crazy stuff going on up there? A slower route, that's what. Just keep driving straight to me. Otherwise, yet another rudimentary track with soft turns and no obstacles to speak of. Crown City, Mushroom Cup. I'm separating them? What about the version of this track in verses with the 3 different routes though? Well, for one, this list is mostly based on how these appear during Grand Prix. And 2, the layouts used in Shell Cup that we'll be talking about later down the list doesn't fully exist in the versus variant. In fact, I like that version more than the 3 checkpoint variant in versus. But we're jumping ahead here. As for this version in Mushroom Cup, again, it's fine. The stuff on the rooftops is cool, but the other half of the track is this wide open 4-lane road where you guessed it, drive straight before you circle back around and fly straight, of course. It's all just a little too barren for my liking. Crown City is one of the more prominent tracks in this game. The song is a bop, and there's several different layout variants depending on what intermission you take to get here. The one in Mushroom Cup, though, a little dull. 3-star tracks. Dino Dino Jungle. I feel I might be the only person on planet Earth that prefers the original version. They show more dinosaurs this time, and it seems that's all it took to win people over. But I don't know. The original was actually pretty tricky. Really, go and play it in Double Dash. That bridge portion in particular is deceptively hard. Much like a lot of the tracks in World, things are pretty open here, de-emphasizing a lot of the turns, especially in contrast to the original. That daunting bridge bit in the original has been scaled back and is also much easier now that it has railings, and that expansive looking cave has also been scaled back to, again, a much safer edit. No more bottomless pits to fall in. Also, what is this route up here? It is not easy to get up here to begin with, and then what do you get? Well, a slower route, of course. This is Mario Kart World. What else were you expecting for your efforts? I think it's funny how this game has so many bits that clearly only exist for the sake of expanding the open world, so then we're left with tracks that have all these routes they just left in, blatantly not worth taking, but whatever, it's there anyways. Comedically unfocused game design. Beach Stadium, Special Cup. This is the one that isn't a rectangle. It's a decent circuit track, but as a lead into Rainbow Road, yes, this is really the track that precedes it. There's not much going on here. The thumbnail shows a chain chomp, weirdly absent from the actual layout, making this yet another track with no obstacles. Not that every track needs obstacles to be good, but it could have helped here because otherwise the coolest part of the track for me is an elevated rail that lets you take this turn super tight. Oh, come on, surely this track has more going for it than that. No. Mario Circuit. Look, I hate the fact they keep bringing back the SNES Mario Circuits back as much as the next guy. Believe it or not, there's been a Super Nintendo Mario Circuit track in 8 of the 10 Mario Kart games, which is crazy to think about. But if they were really going to bring them back again, how Mario Kart World handles it, I think, is decently clever. Super Nintendo had multiple Mario Circuits, right? Ingeniously named Mario Circuit 1, 2, 3, and 4. And in the case of World, Lap 1 is Mario Circuit 1, Lap 2 is Mario Circuit 2, and Lap 3 is Mario Circuit 3. What about Mario Circuit 4? Don't you dare speak of Mario Circuit 4, it is forbidden. Or supposedly, Mario Circuits 1 through 3 all returned even before World. Yet Circuit 4 was not even good enough to be included in Tour. Yeah, I don't know. What do you want me to do about it? I just make YouTube videos or something. The choice to combine 3 tracks in one saves it, I think, but otherwise it's just your basic flat Super Nintendo circuits. Some good turns, but otherwise you know what you're getting with this one. Okay, well, what about Mario Bros Circuit? You know, it's alright. More than alright, actually. As far as starter tracks go, this is one of the better ones. It is still, you know, the first track of the game, so it isn't crazy or anything. But taking place in Radiator Springs from Pixar's Cars makes it feel visually distinct from most other circuit tracks, and it's got a decent bit going on. The grind rails are a nice complement to the first couple of turns, and the alternate path at the end leading to a glide ramp is also fun. I do wish there was some good use of the wall riding, and the roads are way too wide, but it is the first track, I'll cut it some slack. Acorn Heights is, as far as I'm concerned, worse Wild Woods. I'd even argue argue it looks worse, which is crazy considering that came out over a decade ago on the Wii U. Really, here's the gliding segment in each game. The glider segment on Wii U is just so densely packed of details and colors. Visually, there's just so much more going on, and unlike World, it doesn't dwell on it. Such a densely packed shot, but this glider segment, less than 3 seconds. Then the one in Acorn Heights is twice as long and half as interesting. That's what I like so much about Wild Woods, and Acorn Heights just doesn't have it, and that's pacing. There's a lot to Wild Woods, and you're escorted through all of it pretty quickly. Everything cool about Acorn Heights is related to this turn right here where you can do a mushroom cut, you can cut it from above, and I'm pretty sure you can take it shroomless by wall riding. I swear the whole segment before is built up for skipping this one turn, and then the rest of the track just kind of meanders. Grinding on vines at the end is sort of fun, but make sure you don't use a feather, I guess. Thanks, Lakitu. Salty Speedway. You know, I feel a little dirty putting this so low. Must be the salt water. Jokes aside, I really like half of the track. If you've been paying attention, you could probably guess what half that is. From the starting line up until you get back into the water, very solid design. Lots of cool stuff happening above if you wall ride. You got rails you can ride, verandas to jump across, but even if you aren't doing any of this tech, the turns are tight, lots of stairways to get quick boost off of, really solid design. And then water happens. There are a bunch of routes on land, but much like Dandelion Depths, most of which are slower than the main water route. I always thought this was funny too, because I remember in the direct when they were showing off all the tech and they were like, wow, look at all this crazy stuff you can do in the game! But then you look down and realize all this impressive looking bullshit is actually slower given Birdo's getting passed up by like the whole pack of racers. I wonder if that's why they conveniently omitted the position indicator you normally have to let you know what place you're currently in. Might have been embarrassing to hype up the tech only to show it's actually slower in a lot of cases. But yeah, I don't like the water segment. Cool alternate routes aside, water makes up a large majority of the track, so I ranked this where I did. Speaking of water, Cheep Cheep Falls is, in my opinion, the best use of water in the entire game, which is kinda depressing when I still have it ranked as a 3-star track. What makes it work? Well, you're racing with a fast current, which makes for a water segment that isn't painfully slow, and since it's all downhill, there's a higher emphasis on the buoyancy water provides. You know, dipping under the water and then popping up of a trick. It's fun, keeps up the speed, good stuff. Also, especially for a water segment, this half of the track is really densely designed. Logs to grind on, rocks to trick off of, a far cry from most of the water gameplay in this game, which typically looks like this. Ironically enough, it's actually the land segments that hold this track back. There's just not enough going on. Just this single, widely spaced route up until you get to the falls. It's still a decent track though. Sky High Sundae. Oh man, what a glow up from 8. Although part of me suspects that this track was always designed for Mario Kart World, and they threw in a watered down version in Tour and Deluxe just because. Seriously, what the hell was up with that awkwardly placed guardrail you clip through? It's almost as if Nintendo was going, oh man, if only there was a Mario Kart where you could grind on rails! Wouldn't that be cool? Yeah, or if you're adding courses in an older title that doesn't have that, just don't, you know, add weird models you clip through? Beyond just looking way nicer, what makes this track work is World's core mechanics. There are tons of opportunities to grind on rails and drive on walls, and this track works because it's designed around that. Of course, that's not to say there weren't structural changes made either. Small on the surface perhaps, given this track is still ultimately an oval, but there's a plethora of routes to take now, which gives you a lot of options when deciding on how to approach this one. Also, for all of the weird implementation of the tech that clearly wasn't intentional in Mario Kart World, I want to give credit to Sky High Sundae for this final hairpin where they made this wall really tall, practically begging players to wall ride here. Very intentionally designed, feels good to take. This track is still just a lot of going straight and pulling a bunch of tricks, but there is good tech implementation here, and it's enough to hold your interest start to finish. Crown City, Shell Cup. I really like this layout, relatively speaking at least. Crown City has a multitude of different versions depending on what intermission you took to get here. Then of course there's the 3 checkpoint versus variant, but as far as I'm concerned, this is the best one. The reason I like this particular loop is pretty much all because of this half where you're driving through tight alleyways. The turns are sharp, it feels focused, and this rail takes you up to the rooftops where you're set up for even more wall riding and rail grinding shenanigans. This route is used in the 3 checkpoint versus variant, but it's in reverse, so you don't have access to these rooftops whatsoever. Ending the track outside of the city and on the beach is also a fun touch. Is this one of the all-time best? Not really, but it's more tightly designed than a lot of stuff I ranked below it, and I genuinely do enjoy this loop loop whenever it shows up. Toad's Factory, a fan favorite, and by myself as well. This was one of my favorites on Wii, so it might seem weird to have it ranked as a 3-star, but I don't think they did enough to update it for World's new design philosophy. And without any major updates, this track just kind of feels like a clusterfuck with double the racers. I think the best new addition are the suspended girders you can grind off of. It's a fun way to cap off the track, and being a shroomless cut is a bonus. They did add an elevated path following the first turn. You can use the new while riding the reach, but in classic Mario Kart World fashion, it's slower. I mean, obviously, right? Doesn't take a genius to conclude that hugging the inside of a turn is faster than taking the most outer racing line possible. The irony is that this is, at least in the confines of one of the tracks, the only instance in the entire game where they lay out a trail of coins up a wall to signal that you can go up it. Really? This world is huge, and this one single turn in Toad's Factory is the only time where they bothered to signpost a wall route with coins. So you can't argue that this one wasn't intentional. However, much like most of the wall rides that are clearly intentional, it's slower. How do you... It just boggles my mind. Nintendo implements this really fun tech, and like 90% of the game seemingly wasn't even designed with it in mind. So it was up to the fans to figure out what tracks is actually worth bothering with. I mean, that's like if someone played Mario Kart 8 and didn't know that anti-gravity was in the game. That just isn't going to happen because it is a mandatory inclusion in a lot of those courses. But when it comes to wall riding in World, there's no jumps that direct you into a wall you can ride, only a single instance of coins trailing a wall in any of the tracks. Not once ever do they place a boost panel on the wall anywhere in World, which could have really made a lot of these slower outside wall routes actually worth taking. Not to mention, it would immediately communicate to the player that wall riding is something that exists in the game. If they really leaned into the new tech, they could have done some crazy track designs, instead of it feeling like some incidental feature that was included last second. Again, I give serious props to the fans for finding all this weird, almost game-breaking cuts. But these tracks could have been so much more if the tech was more heavily incorporated into the main routes themselves. Oh yeah, Toad's Factory is whatever, I guess. The turns you can quickly take by riding along the conveyor are still as fun as ever. The bottom line though is that I wish they did more to update the track. 4-star tracks, DK Pass. What? I lament that they didn't change Toad's Factory enough and then put DK Pass on a 4-star. Reddit's pissed. On the surface, it might seem like they changed just as little about DK Pass as I did with Toad's Factory, but this is definitely a Sky High Sundae situation where it's more that the track complements a new tech so well and feels so naturally integrated that it makes an otherwise rudimentary track fun. Because let's be honest here, it's DK Pass. With all the new tech, and especially with the decision to bring back the feather, Mario Kart World needed to focus on more vertical, layered track design, which is more or less what DK Pass is. Look, if in a Mario Kart game you get an item, and your immediate reaction to getting that item is, what the f do I do with this item? Then that says a lot about the overall design of the game, and more specifically, how this game is just a mess of ideas. If they are going to insist that the feather should be part of the roulette, more courses needed to implement a better sense of verticality. Otherwise, just don't include it. Put in something else. Something better, like the Tanuki leaf. Yeah, I said it. What are you gonna do about it? In DK Pass, though, since the track is so vertical, it's immediately obvious where you should be using the feather. All the tall walls also give you tons of opportunities to wall ride, and there's so many tech opportunities that both new players and high-level players are going to have a lot of options. If you're newer to the game, you can skip turns like this by bouncing off the signposts, and if you're more experienced, you can take this cut where you bounce off these trees. This tree one in particular is cool because it's not as committal as some of the other insane tech you've likely seen on social media. There's no risk of going out of bounds and falling down a pit. Worst that can happen is that you'll end up in the heavy snow. Truth be told, putting DK Pass this high makes me wonder if it actually is that good in World, or if I just dislike a good chunk of this game's track selection that much. Airship Fortress. Not gonna lie, almost feel a little peer pressure to place this one high. I have similar thoughts to it as I did with Toad's Factory, or I like the original, and this version as well, but it doesn't feel like the changes Mario Kart World made were taken into consideration. The 24 players makes this first bit a complete mess. The roads are just about as narrow as they used to be, and the new grind rails are cool, but it's kind of annoying having to fight over them online, especially when players are desyncing. The last cut you can take with a mushroom is cool, otherwise the strengths of Airship Fortress are the same as they ever were. Said strengths being the numerous obstacles and the simple but strong layout. Adding an additional route or two wouldn't have hurt, but otherwise, Airship Fortress is still a solid track. Great Question Block Ruins. Is this the most universally liked track in Mario Kart World? Probably. I do think it's funny that many of the most thematically interesting tracks in this game are only possible by completely segregating themselves away from the open world. Question Block Ruins, Sky High Sundae, and of course Rainbow Road all feel so visually distinct from the world because they're basically not a part of the world. They're off in the sky doing their own thing. Really goes to show how how the decision to connect every course in some way homogenizes almost the entirety of this game's track selection. Playing the new Kirby Air Ride reminded me of how unique every track can feel in the confines of a self-contained title when you're not trying to cohesively fit everything into a single location. Again, Great Question Block Ruins being case in point. It feels so uniquely its own because, well, it is. So the theming is peak, but what about the course itself? Well, the funny thing about this track is that there are a few bits that I don't think are particularly well designed if you're taking the track normally. For instance, you have this insanely sharp turn following this jump, like so sharp you can barely even take it with certain character and cart combos. Really, something like this would probably be fine in 8, but you can't steer nearly as sharp in World. And I swear World does this thing where anytime I try the brake, this happens. So sure, if you're driving the track normally, a segment like this can feel like ass, but that's why you're incentivized to take this inner rail. It allows you to take the turn sharper than you could ever possibly take it while driving normally, and it's fun to pull off. Ideally, you shouldn't have to be a lightweight to be able to take a standard route optimally, but whatever. The thing I do like here is how many routes just about every segment has. Not all of which are exactly practical, but hey, I do like options. And it isn't like the routing on a lot of other tracks we've discussed where the alternate path is super out of the way and slower. No, everything here is pretty streamlined. Really solid stuff. I think my biggest critique of this map, and it might seem like a weird one, but it's the fact it ends on a straightforward glider segment. I hate it when tracks have these because there isn't much you can do during these moments, and when it's right before the finish line, it's cementing your position well in advance. Even the intermission has this. Like, here I am playing with my friend online and he's in 7th when taking this geyser up, but since you don't exactly have a lot of influence of what happens during segments like this, it's just like 12 seconds of just accepting that he's not passing the checkpoint and there's nothing he can do about it. Like, just rip the band-aid off for f***'s sake. Do people actually like it when a track is capped off of a drawn-out flying segment with 0 obstacles? Sort of feels like the eye candy is being prioritized over the actual gameplay. Nothing wrong with a money shot, but shouldn't the last moments of a race be some of the most exhilarating? Especially if you have people tailing you. You shouldn't confidently know that you won several seconds before even crossing the finish line. Saying all of this out loud has me wondering if I rank this too high. Ah, whatever, it's fun. The theming is great. I like all the alternate routes and rails. Still a good map. Whistletop Summit. While I think that wall riding is theoretically cooler, the rail grinding is without a doubt the best new addition to Mario Kart World. And Whistletop Summit is a great showcase as to why. You can be grinding on rails practically start to finish, something that limits your movement options, mind you, and yet Whistletop Summit is still one of the best tracks in the game. The thing that makes rails great in Mario Kart World isn't the mere simplicity of grinding on a single rail. It's the fact that you can jump off of a rail and all the options that provides. And options is the key word here. Like in this last segment, you got rails interweaving all left and right. It's almost overwhelming how many different ways you can approach the final bit. And it's not even like the entire appeal of this track rests on its conclusion. There's a lot of cool stuff here. There's basically an alternate route the second the race begins, and it never lets up. Plus, the theming is cool and there's trains. So train fans rejoice. Shy Guy Bazaar. I originally had this ranked way lower. I thought the Bazaar segment felt kinda cluttered in this version, and I was really butthurt this could take place during day now. I still think the track looks much better at night, but you know, I got over myself and realized that those nitpicks aside, there's a lot on offer here. I don't know what the general consensus on the original was, but I think Shy Guy Bazaar is an easy contender for one of the best Mushroom Cup tracks, which I suppose is a low bar, but I've always liked this one. There's some decently sharp turns here, the glider segment is brief while still containing an obstacle, and I like all the grind rails towards the end of the track. I think the optimal tech meta is a little too precise for my liking, especially this cut right here where you narrowly graze this stone slab. I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but much like a majority of the optimal tech in World, it doesn't feel even remotely intentional. I'm sure, especially for the real sweaty Mario Kart World players, what was or wasn't intended design courtesy of Nintendo really doesn't matter, but I don't like feeling as if I need to study a game like homework to be playing it right, especially when said game is Mario Kart. And I would argue that everything ranked above has design that feels much more intentional in my opinion. Designs such as Faraway Oasis. Reddit's pissed again. I'm fully aware I'm ranking this much higher than most, but I really like this layout. There's no segment that meanders. Every bit of this track feels concise and focused. I particularly like how water is used on this map, because water sucks, right? The funny thing is that it feels like this map recognizes that and uses it as a punishment. When taking one of the optimal routes, water is used more like a trampoline here. Go off this jump, bounce off the water, and you never have to touch water again for the rest of the lap. Well, except for this waterfall, but it's not actually a water segment, so it doesn't count. And doing all that leads to this fun path above what would otherwise be this sloppy turn on water. Again though, this track is designed in such a way where you basically only have this one brief water turn, and the build up to said turn is about giving you options to avoid it. I also appreciate how this is one of the few tracks where the feather actually has pretty solid utilization. It's begging to be used to jump over the wall in this final turn, and it's a really good cut. In fact, fact, it might actually be better than a mushroom when it comes to this final turn. Great track. Yeah, sure, it'd be cute if the animals were used as obstacles somewhere on the track itself, but taking this track for what it is rather than what it isn't, I respect the design here. Wario Stadium. Once upon a video, I called this the worst track in Mario Kart 64. Now here it is as a 5-star in one of my own ranking videos. So where does this version of the track succeed where the original failed? Well, being able to trick off ramps gives purpose to the slew of jumps scattered about. Honestly, that alone would have made this track way better in pretty much any Mario Kart post-DS. But on top of that addition, a lot of the fat has been trimmed here. The original had multiple segments where there wasn't too much going on, but now nearly every inch is packed of jumps and potential tech. I think maybe there's an argument to be made that perhaps they trimmed away too much. I mean, you compare the layouts between versions and it really isn't even the same track at all. I know Nintendo is allergic to making longer tracks of 2 laps. They only ever did that, what, once? But it could have been cool to see a slightly longer version here too, of 2 laps opposed to 3. Of course, one of the biggest highlights are all the tall walls you can ride on, all lined with grindable rails at the tops. This stuff is well implemented and gives you a lot of options whilst also having very clear design to it all. It's not like some other tracks where there's just a bunch of clutter everywhere and it's like a game of how much bullshit you can bounce off of before returning to the track. In Mario Stadium, all of its elements are deliberate and opaque. While I've made it abundantly clear during the runtime of this video that I'm not a fan of how Nintendo decided to implement the tech in this game, or in most cases, not implement it, it is tracks like Wario Stadium that give me a lot of respect for it, so kudos. Dry Bones Burnout. With the impulsive decision to double the number of racers from 12 to 24, a lot of courses in this game fell into this trap of making all the roads way too wide. I mean, when you're on the last track of the game and you're still looking at 15-lane highways, something is very wrong. When you got this many people all cluttered into a single race, you basically got 2 options. Either make the tracks needlessly wide, or the much smarter option, make tracks with a multitude of routes to spread everyone out. Of the two, Dry Bones Burnout goes for the latter, and really plays around with the idea that this is a track of multiple routes. It's practically its entire identity. So you got a ton of routes, grind rails, mushroom cuts, but I think the best part of this track is the entirety of this ending segment. There are so many ways you can approach this last segment leading up to the finish line. This jump line of a wall you can ride to cut the first turn, super fun. Then there's a similar bit where you can ride off this wall to reach a glide ring, taking you to an upper path above the finish line. Then in terms of theming, the f***ing music slaps, and the whole Day of the Dead motif is something that really stands out in the Mario universe. I feel like I'm maybe not being descriptive enough here, but I really don't know what else to say. Good routes, good turns, well conveyed implementation of the game's new tech, a great track overall. But not my favorite. That would go to number 1, Bowser's Castle. Now this is a fantastic rendition of the expected Bowser's Castle map. Funny, because this is the least it's ever felt like a castle. Could have just as easily called this one Bowser's Barracks or Bowser's Factory, since this is a very industrial feeling map. I'd argue to its benefit since it puts a fresh spin on a familiar location, and also, well, I haven't ranked as number 1. So for starters, the music is sick as hell. That screeching electric guitar is so cool. Not my favorite song in the game. Granted, tough competition with an OST this good, but it's certainly the coolest. There's tons of tech options if you're a huge sweat, but what I like is that even when just taking the track normally, no thrills, there is just so much going on here. Also, this is probably shallow of me, but I don't care. When I play Mario Kart 8, I play 200. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. After perfecting 200, 150 just felt way too slow. I mean, the difference between 200 and 150 is bigger than the difference between 150 and 50 in Mario Kart 8. Kind of odd, but that's the truth of the matter. So going to Mario Kart World, where not only is there currently no 200, but the 150 is even slower than the 150 in Mario Kart 8, like I was almost immediately indifferent to the game. So it should really be no surprise that the tracks I ended up gravitating towards are those that have quick pacing. And seeing as half of this track sees you in a wind funnel that finally increases your speed, it was a breath of fresh air. Also, there's like meteors you're dodging with hit markers so you actually know where they're about to land. This part is awesome. The cool thing about Bowser's Castle though is that even when you're not in the segment with increased speed, the design is so tight and compact that the pacing is never let up. One of my favorite versions of Bowser's Castle in the entire series. At the very least, it's my favorite map in this game. Alright, there's the ranking. Now time to do something I haven't done in a while. A bunch of maps to find out what the best cup in the game is. So here we got the cups and the tracks. Here is every individual score I gave. And finally, adding everything up to get the averages, these are the scores for every cup in the game. Definitely a lot lot lower across the board than last time I did this, which was in my Mario Kart Wii ranking, by the way. Great track selection in that game. As for this game, the standout here is Flower Cup. I mean, damn, that is a stacked lineup that is very unfortunately being held back by Desert Hills. Going by my own metrics, I suppose, Star Cup is numerically the weakest in Mario Kart World, which is fair. I don't think I've seen any of those tracks crack anyone's top 5. Even though numerically it's higher, I think the biggest dud for me is Special Cup, because even if you like Rainbow Road, this is the final cup of the game we're talking about, and you seriously have 2 circuit tracks back to back? Really? But anyways, that's enough grumbling for today. Thanks for watching, and I'm going back to Kirby now. See ya!